Good evening. My name is Conchetta Bensavanga, and I'm the director of the New York Transit Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our home tonight for this wonderful conversation. For those of you who might not have been here before, you are sitting in a decommissioned 1936 IND subway station that was, no kidding, at one point meant to be the terminus for the 2nd Avenue subway. That is true. There you go. The station was only operational for 10 years, and then it was mothballed, only to be resurrected in 1976 when a group of New York City Transit employees petitioned to use the space as a temporary exhibit for the bicentennial. And 42 years later, we're still here and thriving. And in fact, we are the largest museum dedicated to urban transportation in North America. Yeah, thank you. I think so too. I often say that this museum exists to show people that in New York, we are who we are, and we live the way we live because of proximity to transportation. It is very true, and it's a singular story told a million different ways, across the miles and across generations. Thus, we are indeed a museum of stories. Some so incredible that they sound like myths, if perhaps not ancient, then at the very least urban, but all true. And we love nothing more than a good yarn tied to the city we love and its transportation. Enter Miss Subways, about which I will only say the following. In my very large Irish and Italian family, there is a serious premium placed on funny. Goofy funny is always allowed. Mean funny is not. But the best kind of funny, the pinnacle of family funny, is smart funny. This book is that. It's a smart funny delight, and I cannot wait to hear more about it. So thank you for being here this evening. Welcome to the New York Transit Museum, and we hope to see you all again soon.
I just loved this book as a romantic comedy and just as a delightful look at New York from somebody who really, really, really knows and loves New York. I wanted to ask you, David, since we are in the Transit Museum and we are having a subway crisis, you lived through another subway crisis growing up in New York in the 70s. What are some of your favorite?
Yeah, I grew up on 11th Street and 2nd Avenue, so I watched the hole being dug for the 2nd Avenue subway
in
3 or 4 times.
Right.
And then they just fill it right back in. So, you know, the 2nd Avenue subway was going to be like heaven. You know, it was going to turn the city into a different city. And what's going on with the 2nd Avenue subways? It's like on the Upper East Side now where it's no good for
it's got
people
like
like
3
me
stops.
anyway.
Yeah.
I don't want to start out by bad-mouthing the subway there.
We are in the Transit Museum, exactly.
But I did have to walk clearly almost all the way across town just to get a goddamn subway.
To go to school.
But I don't want to badmouth it. Not at all.
We did a Facebook Live event downstairs, and we were in an old subway car, and we were reminiscing about one of the most vivid memories I think we each had growing up, taking the subways. Children, just the incredible heat.
Yeah.
The windows opening, the fan, and you would say you'd stand between 2 cars to get a little exciting chill.
Yeah, even though the warning says it's peligroso to do so, but you do it anyway.
So this is your 3rd novel, and I want to talk about, obviously, what inspired you about, what was inspirational about these images of these young women that were called the Miss Subway pageant, which went on for decades.
Yeah.
And as we were saying, it wouldn't survive today, but it was resurrected 14 years ago or so.
I think so, yeah. Just the image of those, the advertisements was in my mind forever because as a high school student going to school every day, I would sit there and I'd see the ads, which weren't digital back then. They were just posters, little poster board. And, invariably, once or twice a day, I'd see the ad for Miss Subways, which just always seemed to be almost like a joke, even at that time. Like, what, does this really, do they actually?
It seemed so anachronistic even then. Yeah.
Right. So, it was just always in there. And just the designation of Miss Subways was so wonderful to me. Like
Right.
you'd be the queen of the subways in a way. And, and then just when I started to conceive of this story, the whole idea of like a mythological underworld journey, then
Right.
the idea of being the queen of the subway started to make sense to me, that there would be a certain power that you'd get from being underground,
Right.
in the sense of Greek myths. And many myths of, return to the earth and then back out. So it just kind of to stack up.
It is a kind of Hades down there.
Yeah. Well, we're not really doing very well with the plug in the subways here, Maybe things have changed. Things have changed.
So I don't know how many people know that David was a graduate student in English for some time and thought about
for some time.
For some time, right.
Yeah.
And so, what were you, interested in mythological themes then? The book is so widely referenced with Jung and mythology, and you're obviously read very voraciously.
Yeah.
So, tell me about what you were interested in grad school and how, if there's a connection to this work.
I mean, I guess any book I conceive of as being in a conversation with all other books, and most books that are written in the English language are in conversation with the Bible or with Greek mythology or other mythologies, but mostly the Bible and Greek mythology, I would think. And when we studied Freud, as I said to you earlier, when people did study Freud, he was described to me as a literary critic by Harold Bloom at Yale. So that stuck with me, that the science of the mind was really based on reading literature and reading mythology. So to me, it was to enter into a conversation with those kinds of thoughts and ideas and traditions.
And what kind of research did you do in regard to the Irish myths that you?
The Irish myths?
Yeah, retell here, the Celtic myths.
Well, when I was at Yale, and I think I talk about a little in the acknowledgments or whatever those things are called at the end of the book.
Big vocabulary
what are
for
they?
a Yale grad student,
Yeah. In 1983 or 4, somebody took me to see a play. I thought it was a play, but it was a verse play, which I don't recommend to anybody. It's like saying, let's put this poem up on its feet. So, but it was a Yeats poem, or Yeats verse play, called The Only Jealousy of Emer. And in that, Emer is married to Cuchulainn, who's the king. And he has gone off in a frenzy of battle. And because he's fighting so hard, he's actually killed his own son, who's fighting by his side. And he's realized that, and now he's gone off to fight the ocean. So he's got his sword or whatever he's got, and he's fighting the waves, and he's going to drown. And this demon or this entity comes to his wife, Emer, and explains to her what's going on, and says he's going to drown, he's going to die. He's getting onto death's chariot right now. You can watch, or you can stop it. And she says, how? And he knows that, he's a king, and he's had a bunch of lovers. He has concubines. He has a lot of women, but she has this end game in mind, which is, I'm going to have an old age with him. He's going to tire of that, and he'll come back, and we will die together. So the demon says to her, you give up your jealousy, you give up your fantasy, or he dies. And if you choose to let him live, then he wakes up and he doesn't know you. He doesn't know that he was ever with you. He doesn't know that he had children with you. And you can't know him ever again. And it struck me as kind of a cool rom-com idea.
Okay.
Which is why most of my screenplays don't get made.
The heroine here is very, I think, very realistically rendered as a, woman in her young middle age, at a confounding point in her life, working as a teacher in New York City. And I was thinking as I was reading the book, we're at this, such a hot button moment in our culture where no one can appropriate anyone else's experience. I don't know if you, David, or anyone, I'm sure many people here followed the controversy over the poem In the Nation, where a young poet wrote in the voice of a homeless man. And of course, it was immediately retracted. And Roxane Gay and some other writers said, something akin to like, stay in your own lane, don't take story. And I was wondering, I imagine you wrote the book before the Me Too era and everything that's come since, but is that something you think about now? Like, you telling, a sensitive, emotional story about a woman, is that something you worry about in the way the book will be received or think about?
Well, I worry putting out any novel because I assume there's going to be kind of a prejudgmental scheme against an actor thinking
Right.
he's going to write, which my response, and it's not to say that I'm anything like this, but I will say William Shakespeare, so I really don't understand the prejudice. So, when I set out to write a female protagonist, I certainly was conscious that I might be attacked in that way. But my feeling is that, I'm not saying that I'm writing for all women. I'm saying I'm
Right.
writing one woman. And I think of her as a human before I think of her as a woman. So I felt like I could get into her consciousness as a human being. And then, for any kind of stay in your lane kind of discussion, I think, I guess it's a legitimate point to make, but my counterpoint is to say that I think what we want to do is actually try to imagine what it's like to be different from ourselves. And that's actually what we're trying to ask other people to be. We're trying to, I'm not saying I'm an authority on women. I'm saying I tried to write a book with a female protagonist. And I think we want each other to try to walk in somebody else's shoes, whether they're white or black or male or female. And that, writing is an act of empathy, and I think that's what we want. So I don't really understand the consternation about it, because to me, any kind of art is appropriation. Nobody made up anything. We all came into this culture, whatever the color of our skin or whatever our sex is, and we have to use what's given us.
Right.
So we appropriate.
Right.
I'm appropriating this language. I didn't make up this language.
Right.
Believe it or not, I did not. So I don't understand. I mean, I understand the vicious acts of appropriation that have gone on in history, for sure. And that's a legitimate discussion. But unless you can really look at art and say all art is appropriation, I think you're probably full of shit.
Right. Again, because I think it's such, it rung so true to me. Can you talk a little bit about how you got inside this woman's head and her experiences, her insecurities, her...
I don't know. I mean, I really didn't conceive of it as being a woman. I mean, certainly in the beginning, there's like the man-spreading stuff. So that's obviously woman versus man, or
Right.
woman behavior versus man behavior. But I have to say, I'm as offended by man-spreading as any woman out there. And I also have to tell you that I've been thinking the entire time that that's a guy who's like looking at me and really. It's like that guy is the hardest laugh I have ever. He's not with me at all.
No.
Does he look real?
Yeah.
He does.
Yeah, he is. He's pissed off. He's
does
not
not like
happy
me.
here. No, does not like.
He's like, you appropriated that shit. How did I get into it? I shouldn't. My sister is here. She's a teacher.
Yes.
She had given. My mother's a teacher. They both give me insight. My sister gave me no stories. No stories at all about this, because they're all hers.
Right. The satire of obnoxious.
So I think she's going to write them.
The satire of obnoxious parents at a
Well, I'm one of those.
Well,
I mean,
okay.
I could write about it. I'm an
You didn't have to-
obnoxious
you didn't-
parent.
Okay, you are an obnoxious parent, okay.
Yeah.
I loved, another thing I've loved about the book, as somebody who writes and thinks about New York all the time, just, the way so many quotidian things are rendered in a way that I just kept saying, yes, 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 and I just wanted to read a passage that I really love. Okay, let's see. It was raining harder by the time she got to the park. A proper spring rain and the sound of the big fecund drops in her umbrella effectively and pleasantly drowned out the traffic. She marveled at so many activities city dwellers seemed to prize were ones that made you forget you were in New York, strolling in Central Park, having a weekend getaway upstate, a rainstorm or a snowstorm blanketing the city, sounds, and bringing it to a muffled halt. She found it odd that so many people expressed their love for this metropolis by seeking and valuing experiences that negated it either physically or psychically, as if what made the city great was directly correlated to your ability to leave it in your mind or your car. And I just love that, and I read it over and over. I also find sometimes, like, we all hate the sort of mall commodification of New York, and then I'm in the Oculus, in the Sacred Ground, and I'm like, this is fantastic because I can live in New York but feel like I'm in Paramus. Like, that's just, like, hugely exciting, and it is this just weird, weird thing.
I remember I was on a plane once, flying coast to coast, like from LA to New York, and I was seated next to a guy from Cleveland who was telling me that you must live in Cleveland because it's equidistant from LA and New York.
And you're like, all right.
And to me, that's kind of what like living in New York is like. It's so close to places you really want to be.
Right. I have a lot of conversations with friends who grew up in New York in the 70s, and we, talking endlessly about like the changes and how different it was then and what it's like now. And of course, you've raised children here in an entirely different world. I'm sure they were much more cosseted than you were.
I think so, yeah.
How do these changes strike you? What do you think is at the root of them?
What was at the root
At
of the
the
change?
root of all of this completely, different world that New York is now. I mean, is it something that bums you out? Or,
Yeah, I think so. But I'm sure I wax nostalgic.
I guess, are you a
about
real
my own-
nostalgist? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly. But I think, I would blame New York less and I'd blame the parents more. I feel like, and I blame myself. I feel like we don't allow our kids to negotiate their own lives the way I would have had to. My kids played baseball and softball, and they never could solve an argument without parents rushing in to try to solve it for them. And it's like, and I remember I'd be playing in the park, and there wasn't a parent in sight, so you had to figure it out. So I think I miss that for the kids.
Right.
That's just a bullshit rant. that has no place here on the subway.
It's a great story.
Sorry to that guy. Sorry to him.
And have you been stuck in a subway recently at all? Like,
Have I been stuck in a subway?
Yeah, late for something important?
Well, in my life, sure. I remember my senior year, I would just have, I would go to school, and then I was playing basketball, so I'd come home in the evening, and I would always stop at 42nd Street to change subways, and I would call my girlfriend from the payphone. And it was just this ritual.
Right.
Then I would get, like, however long it took for the train to come is how long my conversation would be.
Right.
And it was a dime, and that was it.
And were you a reader on the subway?
Homework.
Homework.
I would
Homework.
save my homework for that. I found a $10 bill once in the subway. Still, I feel a little thrill when I think of it. I'm not even kidding.
We'll plant one on the way. And so, what kind of reader are you now? Tell us what are there certain novels that inspired the structure or the sensibility of this book at all? What are your favorite novelists?
Yeah, I don't know if the structure was, and the structure was difficult to me because
Well, you're going into
parallel
para-reality, yeah.
Yeah, so I really didn't know. It has three parts now, and they're very different lengths. And I think when I started, I thought maybe they were going to be the same lengths, the three parts. I didn't know really what it was or how many different lives I was going to try and give this woman. I didn't really know. That was all a very difficult kind of negotiation with myself as I was writing it. So I don't know. It's funny because it's been compared to American Gods, which I guess has a similar kind of a world. And I can very honestly say to you that I never read it. And I'm so happy that I never read it because after I'd written the book, I was explaining it to somebody, and they said, "Oh, have you read American Gods?" And I was like, "Oh God!" And it hadn't been published yet, and I was like, "Oh God, no." So I went and I bought it, and I was like, I looked at it with terrible trepidation because I thought I'm going to have to burn my book.
Right.
And then I didn't have to. It had very little to do with that. Thank the gods.
And I'm always,
So I guess that answer was no. I didn't read American Gods before writing this.
And my lawyer will sign a document.
That's what my lawyer says. Yes.
So, you have a whole nother career. I'd love to talk to writers about, when and how they write. Is it, I often like to write very, very early in the morning. Some people write in the middle of the night. Some people, can write anywhere. What's it like for you?
I'm early in the morning too. If I'm writing, and I don't write all the time. If I'm writing a book or a screenplay or something, then I usually have to concentrate and do that until it's done. I can't just kind of fly in and out of it. I just need that time and that space to do it. And if I don't get it done quickly, I probably won't get it done.
What's your limit? I mean, what's 2 hours, 3 or 5 hours where you just you can't do it anymore?
I like 5 a.m. to noon.
It's a full
Afternoon,
work
I'm
day.
worthless. I'm worthless afternoon. I can't write anything afternoon. I don't know why.
You're done?
Yeah, I barely text.
You're toast. Text. And what got you out off the grad school track, and how did you decide to become an actor instead? And now, then resume writing.
Yeah. Well, I was in graduate school, and I thought I was going to be a writer. Even if I went on to become a professor, I was going to write in my time off, the 3 or 4 months, 5 months off you get here. And I thought, this is a really good setup for the life that I thought I was going to have. And then I was writing poetry, and I was writing prose and fiction, and it was
how bad was that poetry? Come on,
not so bad. I mean, not great, but.
My poetry was always just.
Is it no good?
Yeah. No.
Well,
I believe everyone's youthful poetry sucked.
the youthful stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got to the point where those seemed, it was all very lonely, and I was like 22, 23 years old and sitting in a room alone, and I was like, there's something wrong with the picture.
Right.
I still had a little life in me, so I thought, well, what about plays? I guess if I write plays, then I'll be with people at least, and not just the four walls. So, and I was at Yale, which is
has a great drama school, right?
Great drama school. They have so many productions going on at all times that they're always in need of actors. And I was able to take classes in the drama school. They didn't even check my ID. They just let me sit in the classroom with these actors and writers.
Right.
And I got to know them, and eventually one of them asked me to be in a play, which was The Green Cockatoo. And I played, I had one line or something, and it wasn't like I was like, oh my God, I'm home.
Right.
But it was something, and I started to get interested in it.
I always go back and forth about the gifts and challenges of writing in New York, because on the one hand, you're constantly getting stories, right? I just like on my walk over here today, I heard some guy on a phone talking, he's worried that his friend was on the wrong meds and how is he going to get on the right meds. And then 2 seconds later, some woman was yelling at her son saying, you asked me 79 times, I'm not getting your phone, we're not having that conversation. You just get it all day long. But then on the other hand, there's so much to distract you from actually, doing the work, and you think, well, maybe it's better to just be alone on a mountaintop or, and I was wondering.
Well, you need a place outside the city.
Right, exactly, to go in your car, right.
Well, that's why I like to get up really early when I'm working.
Because no one's
Yeah. up. I look out the window and I'm like, I'm the only guy working.
Right.
Feels good.
Right,
I feel like I'm getting a jump on all the other writers or people. And then
You've got 600 words before that bagel.
yeah, right.
Anybody's got a bagel.
Those suckers are still sleeping. So yeah, I mean, I think that's why I write early, because if I let the day get a hold of me, then I'll get distracted and I won't.
There's, the novel reads to me as somebody who is really like, on the street collecting. I mean, you're hearing stuff. It's really well reflected.
You do hear stuff in the city, and all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Why don't we open things up for questions to this lovely crowd? Miss.
Nothing.
So first of all, I just want to give a shout out to Meg Duchovny. There are a whole bunch of us here who's she taught our sons and daughters in first grade.
I invited Meg tonight. She wasn't feeling so well, so she couldn't make it. But I will tell her.
Please do. So I had a question. If this book, which I have listened to, became a film, who do you think would be a good person to play Emer?
Yeah. Anybody who can get it made. Yeah, today, last week, different people.
Right.
Today, yeah, Reese Witherspoon would be great. Nicole Kidman would be great. There are people that I've worked with that might not be able to get it made, but I love, like Judy Greer, who I think would be fantastic.
She's amazing.
So I think there's a lot of people that might want to do it because it's a role for a 40-something woman, and there's not tons of those. So I don't think casting it is the problem. It's actually casting it with somebody that has enough juice at the moment to actually get it made. So I don't want to offend who that person is when I finally do make it with them. So we'll say, fill in the blank, it was you all along. I wrote it with your image in mind.
Right. Do we have other questions from the audience? Come on, people.
I got worried. I was listening to it. You read the book. I thought you and Taya did a great job reading. I got worried about what she was going to do. And I think of myself as a strong person who can't even watch the ASPC commercials on TV. The injured animals make me crazy. But I thought you got into the head of this woman well and how you handled that.
Yeah, well, that was thematically was an important part of the book. Also that we live in New York and we do actually share it with some animals, even though we never see them.
Right.
I was greeted by a raccoon coming out of a garbage can, was walking my dog once, and it was scared the shit out of me. So, it happens, and there's tons of animals in this city. We just never see them. So the idea that, that those two lives would intersect, and that she was kind of a woman that didn't have a kid, and there was some kind of maternal instinct going on there. It just all kind of seemed to make sense to me. I've never had an experience like that with a bird or an injured animal, but I would like to think I would regurgitate for them.
Anyone else? Yes, Miss.
Oh, sorry. I really like the train of thoughts that you put in. And every time I read one, I wondered, did you actually see that on the subway, and did that motivate like that section, or did you go picking and choosing that would be a good one, even if it wasn't really on the subway?
Yeah, it was more that I in my mind, I think I first saw these quotes, and I'm not sure if they're still around, but I think it was called Poetry in Motion.
Oh, yeah.
Is it still going on?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So, what's that? Oh, okay. So, and in my mind, I think I recall seeing the first one, which is from The Metamorphosis, the Kafka short story, but I could very well be making that up. But I in my mind, I remember sitting on the subway and seeing this quote from The Metamorphosis and thinking, who is doing that? You know, like, who thought that was a good idea to talk about cockroaches? All the other stuff is just cherry picked for whatever I wanted to happen thematically in the in that part of the story.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could expand on what exactly the dangers are of a man of a certain age who hasn't yet slain a dragon.
That was great.
Sometimes, you know, a line comes out and you just don't question it, and it seems to have some truth in it. I don't know. I didn't elaborate in the book, did I? Yeah, I wouldn't elaborate now either.
I want to read another an excerpt from Yeats that I love too. The intellect of a man is forced to choose perfection of the life or of the work, and if it take the second, must refuse a heavenly mansion raging in the dark. And Emer says, she really had to meet the city employee whose domain it was to choose these quotes. And you say, of course, only a man would imagine that, you know, you're gonna have this great success. These are really options. It's either a perfect life or a perfect career.
Right. You got to choose one.
You got to choose. Yes. I love it.
I don't have a question, more of a comment. I felt that every other page there was some beautiful kernel of genius on it. So I want to read a few, just three, because I had to write it at the top. So one was even flow on the ukulele. I mean, I just loved that idea of hearing even flow on the ukulele.
I have a friend from graduate school at Yale who's a professor at NYU of literature and dance. She's a wonderful, unique human being named Barbara Browning who does crazy ukulele covers.
Oh, that would be awesome
to
hear.
I think she's on the YouTube.
So one of the other ones, because I have my finger in three pages, I cried to dream again.
That's Caliban. Yeah, that's Caliban.
Yeah, so
I can't take credit for that. That's Shakespeare.
Yeah, but just to read it on the page and have it jump out at me. And the last one, I mean, I have it all through here. The shared grammar of a kiss. It's just beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anybody have something, you know, mean to say? That we could shake things up a little.
Is he a butcher?
Hi, I'm just wondering if you chose your editor, and how important is the editor in coming to fulfilling your dream?
I've had the same editor for the 3 books, Jonathan Galassi at Forrest Strauss Giroux, and he's really the first book, Holy Cow, was really only published because he believed in it. Because it was a weird kind of a hybrid kids adult book, and you know, it was impossible to. You know, I was surprised when I first started to try to publish a book that they asked the same kind of questions that they ask of a movie, because I thought I was going to get away from those stupid questions. Mm-hmm. But the question is, you know, who's it for? And it's a terrible question to ask of anything.
That's what your editor, that's what Jonathan asked you.
No, he didn't ask me
he
that.
did.
But I was asked that before, like,
right.
Holy cow, it's it seems to be a kid's book, but there's a circumcision of a pig, and there's you know, a confrontation with a camel in the Middle East, and it's just, who's it for? So I was like, well, it's for anybody that's interested in that story. I don't know. I couldn't say it's for, kids or adults. But Jonathan said, let's publish it. It's for us or whatever. And so I've worked with him, and the process of working through this one was very interesting, because I think when I started to write it, I told him what I was writing, and I don't think he really understood or didn't quite get what I thought I was doing. So I had to write it to show him what I thought I was doing. And once he got that, he was on board, and he would just kind of send me notes like it's dragging in this section, and I think I cut out a chapter per his advice and stuff like that. So I feel like he's a really smart guy. He doesn't necessarily rewrite me. I mean, he'll flag clumsy sentences or crappy sentences or whatever, but he doesn't actually rewrite them. Unfortunately, it'd be great if he did. I'd never worked with an editor before, so it's been a very kind of gentle and good experience for me. I'm not sure that was your question, though. Was it?
Yes. Anyone else here? Yes.
How did you choose the specific mythologies that you had in the book?
Well, as I said, the Cuchulainn and Emer mythology had been in my brain since 1983, really, and I never thought I would do anything with it. It was just something that sat there. So that was there, and that was going to be the foundational myth of the book. Then when it came, then kind of conceiving of the novel, the idea was that as all these immigrant cultures came through Ellis Island and became immigrants to this city and to this country, that they would have brought their folktales, myths, religions with them. And as they assimilate, what happens to those? If they're truly living cultures, let's say for a minute that those things actually exist. Those deities actually exist. What happens to them? Do they starve and get bored and go back home, or what do they do? So once I had that idea, which apparently is in American Gods as well, I'm shocked to find out. Once I had that idea, then it was just a matter of figuring out which adversaries I could create, which kind of mythologies would butt up against each other in an interesting way through whatever ethnicities I was going to have in the book. So it was really just whatever would serve the mechanics of the plot of the novel moving forward. And so I did a bunch of research, and I had help researching as well. So I had a big stack of mythologies from like almost every ethnic neighborhood in the city.
Wow.
So it was a really interesting process to go through. And from that, I chose, very, very little, actually that remains in the novel.
Anything, were there others that you just wish you could have, that ended up on the cutting room floor that you wish you could have played with?
Well, they're remarkably similar. There's vampires,
Right.
Always vampires. There's always Frankenstein, reanimated zombie-like things. It's anthropologically, it's pretty interesting that they all have different names, obviously, but the general forms are very, very similar, and would speak to a kind of universal unconscious in a way.
Right. Anyone else? No? All right. Well, thanks for coming, David. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being with us.
Thank
It was
you.
wonderful.